Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. A House of God reveals how salvation was beamed into every living room.
During that time, to broadcast a crusade in prime time was a revolutionary idea.
A towering structure explains who really built Motor City.
They were typically hired on the spot to work on the Ford assembly line. This was very much known as the Ellis Island of Detroit.
An arena shows how a red-blooded sport became a catalyst for civil change.
Sputnik Monroe would wave for all the people up there, come on down here, come on down here, come on down here, and they would do it.
And one mansion tells the tragic story of a man who transformed Manhattan.
There's a lot of controversy on how his hand could have shot him in the head, so that's why they were thinking it might have been a murder.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures. Forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. In the heart of the Bible Belt is a city with a surprisingly Art Deco downtown.
Tulsa experienced two huge oil booms early in its history, and because of that reason, there's a lot of prosperity in the downtown area. And it is an area where Protestant evangelical Christianity reigns supreme. In fact, there are churches on nearly every street corner.
But one building here stands out, seemingly unrelated to the city's oil-fueled wealth or religious roots.
This building is an icon in Tulsa. A lot of people recognize it, and a lot of people think it's an eyesore.
The first thing you notice is it has no windows. Instead, it has these kind of gold-tinted diamond shapes all around it.
Is it meant to keep people from seeing in to what's going on inside, or to keep people who are inside from being able to see out?
It looks almost like a big Lego brick or something from a science fiction movie from the 1950s in which they're imagining what the future looks like.
Its unique design makes sense when you learn of its creator and his controversial master plan.
The man behind this building, much like the building itself, divides opinions.
What happened inside was revolutionary to American culture.
Millions of Americans would be personally touched by what went on inside this building, even though many of them would never step foot inside of it themselves.
Entering the building in its current state is not for the faint-hearted.
Inside, of course, it's pitch black because there are no windows. But once you bring a flashlight, you see this spooky array of tunnels and rooms. Everything's painted white.
But there is one floor that feels very different to the rest.
Wow. It's amazing how big this auditorium is. I mean, this is a massive, massive room. From the outside, you would never know that there's a huge auditorium up here.
Daniel Iskrig is an assistant professor at a local university and knows all about the history of this building. But until now, he hasn't been inside.
This room would have been filled with seats from this area here up towards the front, which there would have been a stage up there. I can only imagine this room packed with people and the energy of the singing and the organ and just the electricity.
Everyone had come to hear the words of one man, a preacher called Oral Roberts.
Roberts was a consummate showman, someone who could bring in thousands of people and hold them in a state of enraptured connection with God.
In his time, everybody knew who Oral Roberts was. This was a man whose fame extended far beyond Christians.
Here's a little boy who wants his eyesight healed.
Oral became a household name in the late 50s because of his pioneering exploitation of a new form of communication, television.
I didn't mean to hurt you, but God's Spirit came in my hand then. How many fingers is that man holding up? 4. 4 is right. 4 is right.
Roberts was a real early adopter when it came to television. Ratings were pretty small at first, but as TV sales took off across America, so did Roberts' television show.
Roberts realized that these mass media broadcasts could bring hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people together.
To the miracle of television, you have been in our great 10th cathedral here.
The fact that there's Christian television today, that it's one of the primary means by which people receive the gospel, is a tribute to what he did so many years ago by putting the gospel on TV in prime time, and that the world, religious or non, could watch.
By 1957, his TV show was airing on over 135 stations. Oral needed a building to run what was now a national operation. In 1958, work began on his new HQ, the Abandoned Life Building.
So here on the first floor was the destination for those who would come and to visit this headquarters. This particular area here was a giant mural called the Abundant Life mural, which was painted by a famous sculptor. He wanted to make this visitor center a place where people would come in and just be in awe of the magnitude of this ministry.
Oral's extravagant design choices reflected his unconventional interpretation of Christianity.
He encouraged his followers not to feel guilty about success, but in fact, that their proper devotion to God would help them be successful.
For Oral, devotion meant donation.
A huge portion of his programming was fundraising. It was imploring his audience to make whatever small contribution they could for this greater cause.
The power of television meant the money came flooding in, and the Abundant Life building was specially designed to deal with the avalanche of cash-stuffed envelopes.
This freight elevator is one of the largest in Tulsa, and it's because of the amount of mail that was coming in. Up to 1 million pieces of mail came in and out every single month.
It could carry thousands of pounds of mail and packages up into the office portion of the building.
So here's the part of the building where they kept the donations that came in. Here's the safe here, and the safe room. There's literally hundreds of thousands of dollars that would come every month.
But it wasn't just cash in the envelopes.
The amount of people writing to Oral Roberts to receive prayer was just immense. You would have seen this large hall here filled with just rows and rows of desks of people typing out letters.
The building's lack of natural light was part of Oral's obsession with efficiency. He didn't want his employees gazing out the window. He wanted a well-oiled religious machine.
So there's also a number of prayer partners who were on duty all the time to pray, not only for the prayer requests that came in through the mail, but they had a 24-hour prayer line that people could call in. And so there was a room just for that with a massive phone system.
The Abundant Life building was designed as kind of a central nerve center of the whole Roberts organization. And in a way, you can almost look at it kind of like it was a data center or a server farm in modern technology.
The scale of this ministry is amazing. I mean, there were 7 different departments operating out of here. There were 600 employees who were processing prayer requests and mailings and publishing. It was a massive operation.
Oral reeled people in with his TV shows. His staff here then connected with them. The size of his captive audience was unprecedented in the world of evangelism.
I mean, ministry in general or churches are usually localized, but he found a way of taking his ministry and growing it exponentially.
In 1962, Oral's insatiable appetite for growing his empire led to ground being broken on a new and far bigger project.
Oral Roberts made a big impact, not only with buildings like this where he had his ministries, but also in the early 1960s building Oral Roberts University, 250 acres in South Tulsa with over 20 buildings and then a hospital and a graduate school.
After he completed his Oral Roberts University, he decided it was time to move his entire operation to that new facility. And the Abundant Life building went silent.
Oral's popularity continued to rise after he had moved on from the Abundant Life building. But in 1987, there was a pivotal moment when it all began to fall apart.
He called for his followers to donate more than $8 million to his university, or else God would call him home.
Some people really viewed Roberts as somebody who was so focused on the money-making aspect of his ministry that he was essentially a huckster or even a charlatan.
I think perception of Christians on television was changing, and so by the 1980s, the novelty of an Oral Roberts was wearing off, and so the more things he was doing, the more questions and skepticism was there.
The income from his ministry dwindled, and Roberts gradually faded from public life before passing away in 2009.
In the end, the legacy that Roberts leaves is a lot like the building in downtown Tulsa. Some people just don't know quite what to do with it. It may be an eyesore, it may be something that is connected to that town and people feel a lot of pride about.
But the Abundant Life building will always be a reminder of a time when preaching in America radically changed. On New York's so-called Forgotten Island are the haunting remains of a business empire that molded the city.
We used to call this the Psycho House because of the resemblance from Psycho from the movie. Like, we used to come here and just get close to the house and then get scared, run, take off.
The architecture is classic haunted house fare. The woodwork on the outside is all old and faded, and the beams are starting to lean over after years of holding up the weight.
The rounded balcony and needlepoint roof is a really common feature of this particular architectural style, but it really ups the creep factor of this house.
Within are artifacts of another century.
The inside is almost like a parody of a haunted house. The walls are covered in this material that looks more like flesh than wallpaper.
But one clue reveals the secret of why this house was built and how it was paid for.
In the living room is the centerpiece, the fireplace, which you would think there's nothing really significant about. But if you take a closer look at the bricks, you will see a very specific name.
This mansion once belonged to a multi-millionaire, one whose name is all but erased from history. On Staten Island is the former home of a wealthy businessman. Rick Rispoli came here as a child. Now, he's the caretaker.
This room was basically the main room of the house. It was used for entertaining, stuff like that. Back in the day, probably the high elites of the town and of the island back at the time, probably all met here and hung in this room.
But at the turn of the century, happiness turned to despair.
This house has a dark, tragic history, unfortunately. In 1894, the body of a man was laid there with a gunshot wound to the head.
There is a mystery still to it to this day. If it was a murder or not, there's a little controversy there. If he was murdered, if it was a suicide.
The deceased was an heir to a business empire. His father was a man named Kreischer.
Balthasar Kreischer was born in a small village in Germany. Kreischer was also a businessman, and he would become a very successful one.
In 1836, Kreischer boarded a boat bound for New York. Just 7 months earlier, Manhattan's business district was in flames.
It started in a warehouse, and then because of the winter wind, it sort of spread and went everywhere. Now, there was a fire department, but most of the rivers were frozen, so that hampered their efforts. And the only thing they could do was to create a fire break by blowing up the buildings around the fire.
Hundreds of buildings were lost. New Yorkers lived in constant fear, but Kreischer saw an opportunity to make money.
Kreischer was drawn to Staten Island because of rumors of a treasure in the wetland dirt. That treasure was clay.
The Western Bank had copious amounts of clay, enough for Balthasar to build his fortune.
This is how the Kreischers made all their money. Right here with the bricks. Balthasar Kreischer came here as a German brick maker. New York City was burning down. He came here, got all the clay, built in his factory, built all his bricks, and helped build back Manhattan in the 1800s.
Clay presented an opportunity. The Great Fire only spread as it did because New York at that time was predominantly built out of timber.
Even at this early date, New York was a major metropolis with commodities everywhere and people packed in and buildings built right next to each other and out of timber of all things as well. So fires were inevitable, especially devastating ones like what they experienced.
Balthasar Kreischer built a factory on the riverbank.
And the factory was straight across the street, which was right on the waterfront here, was the whole factory, where they used to make the bricks and throw them on the boats if they needed to send it to Manhattan, up to New York City. He set up his own kingdom here.
Kreischer was so successful that eventually he was able to build Company Town. This town had everything, a fire service, religious institutions, and community places for people to gather. Eventually, it became known as Kreischerville.
Kreischer's bricks were used across Manhattan, helping ensure the city would never burn down again.
There are still many buildings in the city today that still stand that are made out of his bricks.
The business made Balthasar Kreischer a multi-millionaire. Back at Kreischerville, he built his family mansions.
There was actually 3 total mansions. Balthasar Kreischer had one mansion, which was behind this mansion up on top of a hill. And then he built this one for one of his sons, Charles Kreischer. And right next door, he built another one for his son, Edward Kreischer. It was identical mansions.
Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings. Oak staircases ascended from the vestibules, and an expensive material covered the walls.
Charles decorated the house and the foyer with some special wallpaper, as you could tell. But this wasn't wallpaper, this was a mixture of leather and linoleum called encruster. And because of the linoleum, it doesn't crack. So this is running over 100 years right now, and it's still in very good shape. This was the rich man's wallpaper back in the day.
Kreischer ensured that his sons and heirs were looked after. His legacy appeared to be assured.
He didn't know at the time, but one of his sons would eventually end up laying in the mansion, dead.
But about a year after the mansions were built, Kreischer died. The business fell to the brothers to run, and I cannot stress this enough, it was a massive undertaking. Hundreds of employees, moving the earth, baking it, transporting it to clients. I mean, it was a lot, but they ran it pretty successfully.
The brothers ran the family business for 8 years. But in 1894, Edward's body lay dead in his brother's mansion.
Edward, he went to work that day, 8 o'clock in the morning, was in a good mood, and his body was found about 10:30 later on that day, basically behind the factory, which is straight across the street. And then they brought the body back into this mansion, and then they called the doctors and stuff, and they pronounced him dead here in the house.
Historians agree Edward shot himself for reasons we don't know, though there are some who think that he was murdered.
There's a lot of theories because he was having trouble at the factory. His older brother, George, was put in charge of the factory after Balthazar died. Edward was still on with him, so he was bucking heads with George, apparently, and still to this day, it's still a mystery on who killed Edward Kreischer.
After Edward's death, Kreischer Brickworks continued for another 30 years. But in 1927, the business folded and the mansions were sold.
The mansions changed hands several times. Balthazar's and Edward's house was actually burned down, so there was only this one house kind of left creepy right above the brickworks.
In the First World War, Kreischerville was renamed Charleston. The old mansion is one of the few buildings that remain of the engineering empire that helped build New York City. But in some corners of the town, the legacy of Balthazar Kreischer is still etched in stone. Today, no one lives at the old mansion, but dark tourists still visit the site in search of the macabre.
We do everything from drive-in movies to concerts to a haunted house, which, as you can see, this is one of our haunted house rooms.
Halloween is big business, and I don't know if it's because of, sort of Salem with the witch hunts and, kind of all these old houses and history that's around, but, the idea that you might be strolling and catch a ghost, we can't resist it.
We do paranormal investigations, and we do tours. So we're just trying to make it work. We're doing our best and seeing to keep it up little by little. We're fixing up the whole place. So we're bringing it back, bringing it back.
Near the midpoint of the Mississippi River, the stage is set for a battle for glory.
We're in Memphis, Tennessee, the birthplace of rock and roll and a place that Mark Twain once called the Good Samaritan city of the Mississippi.
On the edge of town is a circular building with a domed roof.
The structure sits in the shadow of Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium. So it's pretty easy to figure out what this building may have been used for.
Inside the building today, it's a mixed bag. You're going to see ticket stubs, trash strewn all around. You're going to see the remnants of a once thriving place that had people screaming and yelling.
You're completely sealed off. There's no natural light. It's tremendously dark, except for a few bulbs that flicker here and there.
The stands have been empty for a long time. For locals, this building is an important part of their history.
When I got here, it was like a dream come true. You know, you think you're on cloud nine. You know, you want to tell all your friends to call, tell everybody that you're going to be at the Coliseum and stuff like that.
When this place was built, America was divided, but an arena for combat would become a cradle for unity. Jimmy Kimball has lived in Memphis for 40 years. He used to come here every week.
All the action started on Monday night. Everybody in town lived for Monday night. You know, they would get rowdy up to the point where they didn't get ejected. They wouldn't get thrown out of the building.
The crowds came to watch a violent spectacle.
All attention would have been focused on what was going on at the center, a battle royale between two men.
This is the Mid-South Coliseum, the mecca for a bloody pastime, known locally as Memphis Wrestling.
Professional wrestling, it's about strength, stamina, agility, an incredible feat of showmanship and storytelling.
Back in the days, professional wrestling was made up of regional markets, and within those regions, they could make their own rules. And Memphis wrestling in particular was pretty intense.
Everybody a bloody mess.
It was a brutal style. It was all about taking things to the extreme. You had metal chairs, thumbtacks, barbed wire, even fireballs.
Well, it sounded like just a big roar because there were so many people in here, you know, you couldn't distinct what the sound was like, but it was loud.
But Jimmy Kimball wasn't watching from the stands. In 1977, he was introduced to the roaring Memphis crowd as King Cobra.
Oh, it was great, you know. You're like, I finally made it. Because when I started wrestling, I never thought I would be here.
Usually there are two combatants in the ring, the good guy and the bad guy, or what's known as the heel. And they are trying to get the audience to either cheer for them or even boo for them, but really get them riled up and excited.
I was always a good guy, and that would get the adrenaline going to make you do better, to make you perform better. You hear the people cheering and kids wanting autographs and signing autographs and shake hands, pats on the back.
Wrestling was an opportunity to let off some steam, but the Coliseum had an even more fundamental impact on the citizens of Memphis. The story began in a jail cell with a wrestler called Sputnik Monroe.
Sputnik Monroe was one of the biggest names in Memphis wrestling, a guy with a shock of white through his mostly black hair. And this dude really put the act on heavy. He used to say, hey, it's hard to be humble with a body that women love and men fear. One day, Sputnik was arrested for being in a bar for colored people, as the term was used at the time.
Segregation was still on the books. And remember, we're in the deep South. We're in Memphis, Tennessee. And here's a man going against the grain in every possible way.
But this wasn't Sputnik's first offense.
Sputnik Monroe would regularly challenge segregation laws by attending African-American bars and reaching out to the patrons of those bars and even giving them free tickets to the shows.
I met Sputnik when I was wrestling, and it was like I said, it was in his career, and he was refereeing down in Mid-South. He kind of took me under his wings and told me stuff that would make me better. Sputnik would go to the black clubs and drink with the guys and stuff like that, and Had built up a good following with him, and they would all flock in to see him wherever he wrestled because he was buddy-buddy with them.
Sputnik's arrest made local headlines. The case went to trial.
He did what Sputnik would do, which was an act of defiance. And how can you upset these other white racists even more? You hire a Negro attorney. Go figure, the man was brilliant. He was brilliant.
Sputnik lost the case, but his actions made a statement. At the same time, the city was planning the Mid-South Coliseum.
In the 1960s, they began drawing up plans for the new stadium, which is going to be the home of wrestling, but also a stadium for basketball and music concerts. And one of the questions they tackle in these designs is where they're going to put the African-American fans.
Venues like this place and others were definitely segregated. The black folk all had to sit in the balcony seats, possibly come in the side entrance, and not be treated equally as the white patrons at a venue.
But the Coliseum would be different.
When the Mid-South Coliseum first opened, it was the first racially integrated stadium in that part of the country.
Over the following 4 decades, the Mid-South Coliseum became legendary. And in 1989, King Cobra fulfilled a lifelong ambition here.
Oh, the night I won the World Championship, well, hey, that's on top of the world. On that particular night, I think I answered all the questions to all the critics.
This is largely an unknown venue. It's an unknown aspect of civil rights. It's an unknown story of interracial activity based off of the shoulders of a 235-pound man named Sputnik Monroe.
The Mid-South Coliseum was a place of unity in an era of division. But Memphis Wrestling was about to face a bigger opponent.
In the 1980s and 1990s, professional wrestling was going through a big change. The smaller markets, the more regional markets, couldn't keep up with these bigger brands that had deeper pockets. Unfortunately, smaller markets like Memphis just couldn't keep up.
As local wrestling faded, the crowds stopped coming to the Coliseum. And in 2006, it closed its doors. Today, the Coliseum is silent.
Well, it kind of saddens me to see it in the shape that it's in, but the building is in good shape. It'll never be the same, but I hope they keep it going because I have a lot of fond memories.
Now it stands as a monument to Memphis wrestling and legends of the squared circle, like Sputnik Monroe, who in 2006 passed away in his sleep.
We know about Hulk Hogan. We know about Macho Man Randy Savage. You know, we know about countless other folk, but we really need to know about Sputnik Monroe. In my mind, he's a hero.
On the edge of Lake Erie, in a quiet neighborhood, is the old gateway to Motor City.
We are in Detroit, Michigan, a city that in many ways built America and a city that has also famously and tragically declined over the decades.
In the satellite neighborhood of Corktown, this building stands above all others.
The most striking thing about this building is its sheer size. It's something you definitely expect to see in the center of the city, but not necessarily 2 miles outside of it.
The grand architecture continues inside.
This place is absolutely beautiful. I mean, the place inside is very ornate. There's grand columns and the arches.
For 3/4 of a century, the fate of this building and Detroit were tied. It's been empty for 30 years, but now there are signs of change.
Not long ago, this building was a decaying hulk. Today, there's a lot of activity here. Something's going on to bring this old building back to life.
Everywhere I go and I sit next to somebody and I tell them what I do, they have a story about this building. When you think about, Detroit is the Motor City, we were part of that original revolution. It's iconic and we want it to continue to be iconic in a number of meaningful ways.
Ashton Parsons first heard of this place from an article on the internet. Now, he helps preserve its history.
The first time I ever came into this space, I couldn't believe how large it was. The scale is unbelievable. You can be red numbers and sizes, but the overall beauty and attention to detail, it's incredible.
The centerpiece is its domed ceiling.
What we're looking at is the top side of one of the 3 incredibly massive arches or domes. Each one of these domes is thousands upon thousands of tiles interlaced together to create not only a beautiful look, but some of the strongest domes that you could imagine.
But the expensive architecture is only a facade. This structure was built for a desperate need before Detroit earned the name Motor City.
Detroit had always been in a remarkable location for all kinds of economic activity. It started as a trading post for beaver pelts.
By 1910, Detroit was already a major city, known for its metalworks. It also became home to Henry Ford's famous automotive factory on Piquette Avenue.
Manufacturing in Detroit was booming, but to become a true powerhouse, the city needed a modern transport system. This is the Michigan Central Station, connecting Detroit to the rest of the United States.
Michigan Central Station was meant to be both a cutting-edge facility to handle all this rail traffic, but also a symbol of Detroit's growth and strength.
But before the station was ready to open, tragedy struck the city.
In December of 1913, while the terminal was being built, Detroit's existing railway depot was severely damaged by a fire.
In an act of desperation, the new Michigan Central Station was opened early.
The Michigan Central Station was really thrust into an opening without any fanfare. It opened and they were ready for it.
Trains were going in and out of the new station with only a few hours' notice. This was a testament to the ingenuity of the people of Detroit.
Within a few months, thousands of travelers from across the United States poured through the station.
We're here in the concourse. You would have had offices upstairs, people walking to and fro. You would have had all manner of people coming in and out of their trains up this ramp, porters coming in and out with their bags.
By the 1920s, 200 trains would leave Michigan Central every day. But the palace of the locomotive would usher in the age of the automobile.
Henry Ford had introduced his revolutionary Model T automobile, and as demand for that car grew, so did Ford's need for workers.
The Detroit Board of Commerce contacted New York's Immigrant Reception Center and asked them to direct manual laborers into their city.
Tens of thousands of immigrants passed through Michigan Central Station and into Detroit, where factory jobs were waiting for them.
They would come here from all different walks of life, all over the world, and this is where they would come to. And so because of that, Michigan Central Station has sort of rightly earned the nickname the Ellis Island of Detroit.
Detroit's new workforce created Motor City. But by the 1950s, boom had already turned to bust.
As more people got cars, they didn't need to live in dense downtown areas anymore. And at the same time, the growing interstate highway system also made it easier to build automobile factories in other locations, especially in the South. All this meant that Detroit was no longer the center of the manufacturing universe. And employment began to fall, and its population gradually began to drop.
As the economy shrunk, so did the importance of this main terminal.
The last train left Michigan Central Station in 1988. For 3 decades, the building stood silent. But now, another Detroit crown jewel is bringing the station back to life.
So I've been on the project since March of 2020, and really my role is to deliver Michigan Central.
In 2018, the Ford Motor Company announced that it was taking over the Michigan Central Station. The company plans to take the neighborhood and turn it into kind of an automotive campus for research, design, testing of the next generation of automobiles, electric cars, autonomous vehicles.
We have really committed to bringing 5,000 employees down to Michigan Central. This main floor will be open to the public. So we really want people to feel welcome to come in.
The refreshed station will revitalize the neighborhood of Corktown and again be a jewel in Detroit's crown.
Instead of going to build something shiny and new, why not bring it back to life and build around it and support it and have it be that beacon as it always has been and the focus of the new.
Michigan's Central Station is to become a defining feature of Detroit once more.
There's kind of a paradox here. This is Motor City, the city that built the automobile and was built by the automobile, and yet the most visible symbol of the city is a train station. Bit of an irony there.